What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares and set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. All right, welcome back, Nightmare Success listeners, in and out. We're here. It's Friday. I don't know when we're going to release this, but it's Friday right now. I am so excited about the guests I have. We come and we listen to these stories because it's what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? Well, Sabrena Morgan, I have been deep in reading her blogs, and if you want to read SabrenaMorgan.com, she wrote these blogs mostly from prison, and it's just, she's such a great writer. And I just told her before we got on, the greatest thing about her writing is that you really truly feel like you're right there with her. You feel what she's saying. You can actually, it's like you're walking beside her as she's writing, and it's fascinating. She has an unbelievable story. It's kind of like she was a kid. It talks about, we'll get into this, that she had a great family growing up. She had a high school, she ran cross country and volleyball, and she got honors in academics. And then, she got into her life, and things that had bothered her or had been a part of her, she started living a double life. She got addicted to drugs. She even got shot in the back of the head, which we're going to talk about, which is just, she was a passenger in a car and shot by a police officer in the back of the head and survived. She eventually got 9 years of sentence, and she just got out a couple of years ago. And there's so much that I want to talk to her about, and I can't wait to unpack all this. Before we do that, I want to recognize our sponsor of the show, Auto Plaza Direct. Who likes spending a couple of weekends walking the lots looking for a car? Then you spend 4 or 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like a trip to the dentist. Well, there's a better way to take you away from all that pain and hassle getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They are your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you. They'll negotiate your best price. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge. The new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Welcome, Sabrena Morgan.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I am so excited to have you. And by the way, I forgot to say, we were talking about all the other things that you've been doing in a short amount of time. This crazy thing called TikTok. You have like 40 some odd thousand followers, and you are so good on it. Now that I'm following you, every time you pop up, I'm like, what's Sabrena got to say? What is she saying today? And it's always so good. Sabrena, you do funny things too. Like you were going to some fancy place, and I can't remember what the gala. You were going to some gala, and you had an ankle monitor on, and you were wearing a long skirt, and you were like, "I'm going, no big deal. This is a new fashion piece here." Sabrena, let's unpack all this because you have lived, and you say this in your writing, it has been a roller coaster for you. And you say so many different things, and I wrote some of them down, but they're like, the fear and danger are not, they're two separate things. And you go into all these different things that, how people get, because this show is about, dealing with your worst fear becoming your reality. How do you get unstuck? How do you step forward into the unknown? And a lot of people get confused with the unknown being danger. And a lot of times it's just the fear of the unknown, whether it's good or bad. But Going back into your world, growing up as a kid, there didn't seem like there was a lot of fear in your world. I mean, it sounded like it was, your dad was an attorney and you had horses. And let me know what all was going on with little Sabrena back then.
Little Sabrena. Oh man, she was something. I didn't have any fear back then. I didn't have any fear at all. And I didn't see anything as dangerous, unfortunately. I was afraid of nothing. And, I traveled and did all the horse shows and everything like that. But deep down, I had terrible body dysmorphia. And I was just convinced that I was so fat. And I wasn't at all. I look back on pictures that I remember the day that I was like crying, oh my gosh, I'm so fat. And I had abs.
Yeah. It's a mental thing.
I would love, huh?
It's a mental thing.
It is absolutely mental.
Right.
So I got into the diet pills early, and then I got into meth. I was just I'm so sorry. My dog is making weird noises.
I don't hear your dog. I was just telling you, Wayne and Stanley, Stanley actually makes funny noises, and he's a black lab, and he talks. I've never had a dog talk to me before, but it really freaks out our guests when they come over to our house.
Yeah. These dogs are something else. I have a Mastiff and then a Pit Mastiff mix, so they're both something else. But before you got into the diet pills and that, did that happen to you when you were in high school? Yeah. So I was a fat child early, like second grade-ish. I got pretty heavy, and then I got into the horses. And when I got in, it wasn't for like a long period of time, but you get picked on. And so it was just heavy. I was just scarred by it. Yeah. And so I got into the horses. Well, right before I got into the horses, I lost a lot of weight that summer. And then my dad got me my first horse. And the next thing I know, I go from just having a horse to going to horse shows. And when you start going to horse shows, then you need another horse for this and another horse for that. And so, I pretty much lived my life at the barn at my horse trainer's house, and then going to shows and stuff. But, I remember we used to use this stuff for stallions' necks it was this burning stuff that it was a salve, and you put it on there, and then you put a wrap on there, and then you go work them, and they would lose all the cellulite and the fat. And I remember putting that on my stomach and wrapping myself up and going in a 100-degree horse trailer and thinking that was a great idea. So, and I was young. Yeah. That was I was really young when I was doing stuff like that. So if I think back along those lines, I'm like, I was not right for a long time, but I didn't have fear. I didn't have it. There was no part of me that was like, oh, I'm afraid to try drugs. I'm like, cool. Let's give this a shot. Let's see what this does.
And you talk about that it wasn't anywhere around as part of your family or anything like that, and that you more or less, Sabrena, and you talk about living, two lives. Like, what age were you when you were living two lives?
I've gone back and forth on this. At first I was like, did I start when I was 12? I think it was closer to 13 or 14.
Yeah.
And I had a boyfriend that had a car, and he would drive me out to get it. So, and that's where it really started. He was the one that was like, hey, you want to try this? And I'm like, sure, let's try it. Mm-hmm. So that's how that whole started. But
did you feel like, Sabrena, did you feel like that was some type of escape for you from these things that you had going on in your head that you were like demons that you were dealing with, but you didn't talk to anybody about? Is that what was going on?
Yes, that. And, I have been ADHD, back in my day, but when the dinosaurs were still here, they didn't diagnose for ADHD.
Right. You're just hyper.
And so, huh?
You were hyper and
What'd you say?
Hyper, like you weren't catching, you were distracted.
Yeah, I was distracted. And so when I did it, methamphetamine's just a molecule or so off from Adderall and all the ADHD meds. And so when I would do it, I could focus. And I did all my schoolwork. I lettered in academics. And then I would go run 10 miles and do 1,000 sit-ups. And so it really seemed to work for me well for a long time. And I could pull it off for a long period of time. Like at first I had a great relationship with this drug. And then, you know, as everything does, you know, it takes its toll, and then you want more and more and more, and you find yourself in bad situations. I didn't go to parties and stuff like that. Like, people didn't know that I was getting high. It wasn't a social situation for me.
Did your parents know?
No, absolutely not.
They did not know.
No. I remember one of the guys that did know, he told his dad. And I remember one of my horses had colic. And I'd been at the barn all morning walking this horse and walking this horse and walking this horse. And it looked like we were in the clear. If horses this big, they can't throw up. So if they can't poop, you're in trouble. So this horse was the love of my life. I'm there walking this thing, walking him. The day goes on, and the vet was like, I think we're okay. You know, take a break for a little bit. And so my friend had called me, and he's like, hey, come over, you know, just stop by. And I was like, I'll stop by just for a little bit. So I stopped by, and his family basically had like an intervention with me. And they're like, we know what you're doing. And so, anyway, my dad called right after all this was going on and was like, hey, you gotta meet me on Front Street, because we got to go to Columbia to get an emergency colic surgery on this horse. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay. So my friend's dad, who was a cop, actually, he drove me to take me to my dad, and he dropped me off. And when I got in the truck, he leaned in and he said, don't let her out of this truck until she tells you everything. And I was like,
oh, wow.
Oh. So, we're cruising along. You know, my dad's super laid back. Like, he's the perfect dad. He's just laid back and, you know, not a judgmental person. And so, you know, we're cruising along, and he's like, okay, so like, what do you have to tell me? And I'm like, I do a lot of drugs. And I was like, I've basically done every drug, every way that you can do it. And I said, I prefer meth. And he's like, oh, okay.
How old,
like,
Sabrena, do you think you were then?
21-ish.
Okay.
It was before I hit law school, and I had made it into college. You know, I was successful with my grades, with all that stuff. And then, but I was losing it mentally. I was really starting to suffer mentally, and it was showing. You know, you can't hide that forever. And so he was like, I just thought maybe you were crazy. I was like, oh, okay. And so we drive to Columbia, which is about 3 hours from where we were. Horses in the trailer. And, you know, when you go to a colic surgery with a horse, you got one shot. You get them nice and feeling good, and then you make that journey. And if something happens on the road, if they go down, you're in trouble. So, you know, it's a pretty intense, it's always an intense journey anyway. So then this didn't help at all. But he was like, okay, so what do you want to do? I was like, well, I guess I'll go to rehab. And he's like, okay, do you have one that you want to go to? And I was like, well, my friend Brian goes to this one, and he said their ice cream was really good. He said, okay, is that where you want to go? I was like, well, yeah, if they've got really good ice cream like that. You know, young and just dumb, and just, you know, there's an emotional train wreck going on in your life. Or like, whatever, sure. Just give me some ice. Just take me where the ice cream's good.
Take me where the ice cream's good. Yeah.
So we got to Columbia, and the horse went through a surgery, and we stayed until about, I don't know, I think it was 5 o'clock in the morning by the time they were done, and sewing him back up. And we watched the whole thing. And then we left, and we drove back to Kansas City. The horse had to stay there for a month. And so anyway, I want to say that was like a Thursday. I don't know why I think it's a Thursday, but I think it was a Thursday, because it was Friday when we're driving back. So we drive back, and we get back to Kansas City, and he's like, okay, we'll start calling on Monday to get, you know, something going with rehab. And I'm like, okay. And so I didn't really think much of it. I was like, I'll be fine. I didn't even think about the withdrawal or the come down or anything like that. And so I want to say it was like probably Sunday night. I was hallucinating so bad, and I felt like a truck had hit me, and I felt like all my bones were broken. Like I had to go to the bathroom, and to get out of my bed, I had to army crawl to the bathroom, and I'm like, what is happening? Like, this is insane. And that same night, this friend of mine called and was like, I need to tell you something. And I'm like, okay, well, what else? What else do you have to say? Randomly out of the blue. And he was like, I just want you to know that this guy has been putting heroin in the meth that you've been doing.
Oh, man.
And so it wasn't that I wasn't really coming off just meth. I was coming off heroin too. And so I will never forget that feeling for as long as I live. Like, that was unbelievable. So I think it was like Tuesday by the time we made it to get into the rehab. And, I went through the whole thing. I was real honest with them. I was kind of into it at this point. I was like, okay, you know what? I can do this. That's fine. I had become so good at hiding for so long that when I had that opportunity to like be honest about it, it did feel good. Mm-hmm. But I went, and they were like, so you detoxed. So I explained everything to them. I told them that, what the withdrawals that I'd gone through, the hallucinations and all that stuff. And when I got done, they were like, you have managed to detox yourself for almost 5 days now. So I don't think you're a candidate for inpatient. You can do outpatient. And I'm like, okay, and so what does that mean?
No ice cream.
I had to go there. Huh?
No ice cream.
There was ice cream.
I know, but you weren't going to get ice cream if you didn't stay.
Well, I mean, during the day, they still had ice cream.
Okay. All right.
There was a whole freezer full of it.
Okay, good.
I don't think it was special ice cream. I think it just tasted really good because of coming off all the drugs.
I'm sure.
And then you're like, fun.
Yeah, you want sugar. Yeah.
So, which that leads me to, I didn't, I didn't do well without, because I was gaining weight. Mm-hmm. And so I think I'm not a fan of having sugar at rehabs, but that's not my circus or my monkeys, whatever. But they actually put me into another group with eating disorder people. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting to go between the two because, like, the eating disorder portion of it, they don't have ice cream hanging from the ceilings, and everything you talk about isn't your bad eating and stuff. You try to work through like your body issues and stuff, and then you go to the drug rehab portion of it, and all they want to talk about is drugs mm-hmm. the entire time. Like, so that portion of the day was just spent talking about drugs. I'm sorry, that was not helpful. And it was not long until I was using again. Mm. Because, everybody's telling they didn't have a really good facilitator. They didn't have people that were there to like kind of guide you through it. People were just basically in there telling war stories. Mm-hmm. And so that's not how it doesn't work. And so it wasn't long. I was back into doing drugs, and I went to 1 year of law school, and during that year, I quit again. I quit everything. I was like, I'm done with it. But my idea back then of being sober, I was still doing cocaine. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, I was still doing cocaine at parties. I was still drinking heavily.
Yeah.
I wasn't sober. I wasn't clean. I was still in a terrible state of mind. And then I developed panic attacks. I found out what my first panic attack was. And I was like, this is not for me. This is nothing. This is not going right. This is not how I saw it. And I had I clerked for a guy who was on what they called the death squad. And so he only represented capital murder cases. And so there was a little girl that, going through some of these cases didn't bother me. Dudes killing dudes, who cares? I don't care. It doesn't bother me. I could look through pictures and eat a sandwich. It doesn't not bother me. But there was a little girl that I remember. There was a manhunt. It was like the first real public manhunt that it was all over the news. Little Pamela Butler was kidnapped, and Keith Nelson was the guy that, he kidnapped her and raped her and killed her. And so I went into work, and we're representing him. And I got into that, and I remember sitting on the floor looking up at my boss, and I was like, how do you represent this guy? Like, how do you do this? And he was like, everyone has a constitutional right to a fair trial, which, obviously going to the federal system later on, that statement kept ringing through my ears. Sure. And I'm like, are you sure about that?
Yeah, right.
Because I don't know. But so I decided law school was not for me. And I decided I needed to get, try to get some things figured out. And then I got into, I sold like ADT security door to door. And I did like rap jobs for like Winston and Marlboro, or for cigarettes and stuff, going to bars, 110.
Sure.
And then I got into real estate. One day I remember I got up and I went upstairs, and my mom was like, what are you going to do today, honey? And I was like, I'm going to go be a realtor. And she's like, you're going to be the best realtor ever.
I read that.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, you're a big cheerleader. Right.
That's the type of family. Well, you're going to do the best. You're going to be the best one ever. And so I did, and I did pretty well with that. And then I met my ex-husband, and in a whiskey-filled 6 months of my life, the next thing I know, I'm married and bought a house, did all that stuff. And then year and a half into it, I was completely sober. Like, I was like, okay, this is my time. Like, this is my opportunity. I'm going to change my life.
Yeah.
This will be, because he didn't do any drugs. He drank, but he didn't do any drugs. So I'm like, this is it. Like, this is going to be the thing. And I did fine with that.
Did he know, Sabrena, did he know about your past and that you were trying to get sober and all that kind of good stuff?
I'm a weird creature, and I don't necessarily tell anybody what's going on. I'm really bad about that. Mm-hmm. I'm terrible about being like, okay, this is what's going on with me right now. Like, you'll hear about it later, but nobody around me like knows really what's going on. I can talk about nothing for hours, and you can feel like we've had like deep conversations and I've said nothing. Mm-hmm. I'm bad about that. Like, it's one of my things that people are like, oh yeah, I know her really well. And they're like, what do you know about her? Nothing. She just talks to you about nothing.
She just talked.
Yeah. Just chit-chatting. Yeah. And so I had been clean a year and a half. I had my daughter. I adored her. I did not adore him. And that was, starting to go downhill. And then when she was 4, we got divorced. And it wasn't the divorce that bothered me. It was sharing custody to somebody that was never there to be around her. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's when I started. That was my slippery slope, straight off the edge. And I actually went to the doctor. I got some Adderall, some Xanax. They love to prescribe that. Yeah. And the next thing you know, you're back off into it again on a much worse scale than I'd ever been on. You know what I mean? Like, it was bad. So I had my daughter week on, week off. The weeks that I had her, nothing was going on. The minute she exchanged hands with my ex-husband, it was the wild, wild west around here. Wow. And, and here I am, double life in it. And you can't live that way. You can't survive that way. You're just surviving that way. You're never going to thrive that way. So,
were you still selling real estate at that time?
Yeah, I was. And I was able to pull off for a while until I wasn't, until, I just started. Yeah, it was just too much. Gone over the edge. And I was losing it. Like, mentally, I was so angry. I was just so angry. And angry is a funny thing for me because
Well, you write about that. I
do.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of your points, is to figure out what to do with anger, because you can kind of change gears and put that anger like in a workout or whatever else that your passion is, to find another obsession and get away from the anger.
Yeah, I have to be so careful with angry. I have to be really careful with it because I'm really good at it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
that's the one emotion I feel confident with. I'm like, oh, I'm good with it, but it's dangerous for me.
So you start sliding off this slippery slope, and you know that you are.
Yeah.
Where does it end up, Sabrena?
So, you know, when you're involved with people and you are selling large quantities of drugs, you don't have just being like, well, I think I'm going to stop now. That's a rough deal, especially a female. Mm-hmm. You know, people are like going to come over and try to, hey, you need to go get this. You know, that's a hard one to get out of. And so, I was in a car with a guy that was wanted, and he was driving. We were about a mile from my house, and it was late. He had done something. I can't remember. I think he come over, was working on my 4-wheel drive on my truck. Mm-hmm. And so we took it for a test drive, and we were turning around. We were getting ready to come back. And, you know, I'm in a rural area, so there's not a lot of cops out here, but it was late. And it was after midnight, and a cop rolled up and turned the lights on, and he's like, "I'm wanted, and I'm running." And you know, honestly, I didn't care.
Yeah,
I didn't. I wasn't like, "Oh no, don't do that." I'm like, "Cool, yeah. All right." I just put my seatbelt on, whatever.
The no fear.
You know,
girl.
I think back. Huh?
The no fear girl.
What?
The no fear girl.
Yeah, back to no fear girl. Yeah. So, we went, he takes off, but the cop didn't chase us, and we get up over the hill, and there's another cop that throws out stop sticks that he was clearly not trained on because they didn't make it more than a foot past his foot. And so this guy just took a right turn, and we're going, and I was like, you know, nobody's really chasing us. Like, what's happening? Something's real weird. And so we took another turn, and I was like, I think this is a dead end. Like, I don't think you should have turned here. So he turned back around, and we were coming up over the hill. And here's this cop that's pulled over. He's got his lights off. He's sitting in the ditch, and he's got a gun pulled out. And I can see this, and I'm like, oh. And he shot into the front of the vehicle, but then he had a flashlight that he shined into the car and saw where I was at. And as we went by, he shot 5 times at the back of my head in a very tight pattern. And so there was 2 in my headrest, there was 1 in my head, and there was 2 in the dash.
Wow.
And so,
Sabrena. Good Lord.
Yeah. So when that happened, the guy driving said, "Oh my God, they're shooting at us." And I said, "Yeah, I know. I was like, I had put my hand up. I was like, yeah, I just got shot." And in those crazy situations, I'm the calmest. I'm like, yep, I just got shot. And he's like, what? I mean, that blood was just pouring everywhere. And I was like, he's like, I got to get you to the hospital. I was like, you're not getting me anywhere. It's like, I'm hopping out the stop sign. So I jump out. I just slammed the door, and I was like, just go. And so anyway, I'm standing there, and I'm like, what in the hell am I going to do?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm bleeding out. Like, this is not good. And I remember like looking, like all the cops like surrounded me, and I remember looking down. I could see the blood running into my boots, and I was like, "Oh, this is not good. This is not good at all." And so anyway, I started cussing him out. I'm like, "What?" I was like, "Is that your policy to shoot the passenger of the vehicle? Like, you didn't even try to stop the driver. Like, so you just shoot the passenger?" We were unarmed. There was no drugs in the car. There was no nothing. There was no good reason for any of it.
Wow.
So, and I know that this county was angry with me, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. They pulled me over. They could never find anything. And so I don't know. I need to do the FOIA on that police report, but I'm concerned about my anger.
Yeah.
But I know it's going to bring some things back, and I'm going to be really pissed off about it. But
so Sabrena, did they, I know they surrounded you, but did they immediately take you to the hospital? I mean, you actually got shot in the head, and it was lodged in your head.
So I'm standing there, and the one cop was like, "Can you just put your hands on the front of the car so that I can pat you down. I'm like, yeah, sure. So like I'm finger painting in my own blood on the top of this cop car. And I'm like, and they just kind of looked at me like I was a circus animal. I was like,
I mean, it had to be like an adrenaline thing that you were on, because I can't imagine that you were just acting normal after getting shot in the head.
Oh no, I mean, but I was this calm.
Yeah.
I mean, I was telling everybody about themselves, but I was this calm, and it was very strange. But like, I remember the ambulance came. Well, there was one cop that kept trying to put like a maxi pad on my head, and I'm like, dude, just stop, just go away. And one cop pulled up, and I was like, he's just staring at me. I was like, because I mean, by this time, blood's everywhere. I was like, I'm not a circus animal. You need to go. And he's like, okay. So I get in that ambulance, and I remember the ambulance driver was like, I have a lot of hair, and I had it up in like a bun, and he was like, did your hair stop it? Did your hair stop the bullet? And I was like, what? He was like, it's not all the way through. Like, it's in your head, but it's not all the way through. And I was like, what? That's a weird thing to say, which I'll come back to that. That's it's an interesting thing. But anyway, so when I got to the hospital, the feds showed up, and I knew what time it was because they never caught me with anything, and I was doing wrong. And, you know, the feds don't need much of anything. It's just go soap, then that's all they need. But when they showed up to the hospital, I was like, yeah, I'm hit. This is not going to be good. But the guy was still on the run, supposedly. And so they searched my house. And when they searched my house, they didn't find any drugs. They didn't find any paraphernalia. But they did find my 12 gauge, which was, I mean, it was legal for me to have. I was not a felon.
Right.
They took a picture of that gun, and then they hit me with drug trafficking with the furtherance of a weapon. And that's how I got that. Yeah.
So how long were you in the hospital?
I was in the hospital not very long. That was the other thing too. They kept trying to tell me it was just glass in my head, and I was like, I can smell my flesh and my hair burning from the bullet, which smells like my body's on fire. Yeah. That is not glass. It's a bullet. So they ended up, it had not gone, it pierced my skull. Yeah. But it had not gone through.
Yeah. You'd be dead.
I'd be dead. And I don't know how, it's a God thing. I firmly believe it. Like, I better do some things because I think I'm here for a reason. So, yeah, I remember all that because they kept giving me drugs, and I was like, you can hit me with all that you've got in this hospital. I'm not going to sleep till you pull this thing out because I'm going to sue them. You know, I'm going on and on. Yeah. And, I never did sue them.
But Sabrena, they didn't arrest you there, did they?
No.
So how long did it go that these feds show up, then that they come and get you?
The feds showed up that night, the night that I got shot. They were there that night. I remember talking to them with a bullet in my head. Okay. And they, some of this almost sounds like far-fetched. They're like, what? You're just sitting there? Yes. I mean, like, it was so weird and so surreal.
I've never heard anything like it.
And I talked, no. And it was adrenaline because after they took that bullet out, all I remember from there on was flashes. Like, I remember I can see flashes of me in a shower with nurses trying to hold me up, and I'm just like collapsing. And I have flashes of me in a hospital bed with a pink handcuff on because I remember talking shit. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, bring me some pink handcuffs. Anyway, I remember a flash waking up and there was a pink handcuff. And I just kind of looked over at the officer that was sitting there, and I don't remember what happened after that. And the next thing I know, my dad was getting me from the hospital. And that's an interesting thing because, you know, your family loves you and they want to support you. But at the same time, like, what do you do with this? Like,
they had to have been scared to death. I mean, you were in a car, you got shot in the head, and your dad picks you up to take you home. I mean, I can't imagine. I'm a girl dad. I cannot imagine what your dad was thinking and how scared he was. Yeah. So you get home. What happens after that? I mean, how does your world has to be like in a spin cycle.
You would think after all that I wouldn't want to do drugs. And they sent me home with like 20 Percocet, and I was like, this is it? After staples. So I had the bullet, but then I had a bunch of glass in the back of my head. So I had 19 staples total.
In your head.
And so,
in your head. You had 19 staples in your head, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so they sent me home with like 20 Percocet, and it wasn't too long after that somebody would bring me stuff over. I wasn't interested in stopping. How are you not interested in stopping after that? I don't know. I don't know what part of my brain was like, oh yeah, let's keep going. Why not? Why stop here? But that was in February, and by June, July is when I was indicted.
Okay, so how did that occur? Like, did they ever talk to you again, Sabrena, or did they just show up and this many months later, what happened? Did they break down your door? Did they tell you to come down and talk to them? Did they just serve you an indictment? Like, what happened?
Oh, yes. Yes. They talked to me multiple times. They had me confused with another girl.
Well, I want to talk about this because this is something that I think is very interesting about your case. I think it's a lot of what some people don't know, because in prison, it's a very common thing. The ghost dope is talked about a lot. When you get out, or you're around people that don't know anything, have never really heard of it. Ghost dope. Can you walk us through how that happens in the federal system?
Sure, I can. So ghost dope it's this simple. Say somebody gets pulled over in an area, and the cop was like, hey, do you know such and such? And they're like, yeah, I know her. And they're like, okay, we'd like for you to come in and make a statement. And they're like, okay, cool. So they go in and they make their statement. The more weight they can give them, the better. The better it is for them.
Weight of drugs, right?
The weight of drugs. And so ghost dope is not actual drugs. It's actually just statements by people. There's no need for physical evidence. And so, people were happy to tell on me. I didn't deal with a lot of people, not very many people at all, which was interesting. When I sat down and read my whole discovery, I was like, some people I knew exactly who they were. Some of it you could tell it was just completely made up. And so that's just what ghost dope is. It's statements by people that are generally trying to get out of trouble.
Right.
They're generally drug addicts
to get a better deal.
And they're typically people that you would never give any credibility to, yet they will take their statement like it's a gospel. So if I said, hey, I saw Brett with a kilo of methamphetamine, they'd be like, okay, sounds good. Thank you. Did you see him do anything else? Did you see any guns with him? And they're like, oh yeah, I saw him with a 12 gauge. And they'd be like, great, thank you. And that's that. Mm-hmm. And you can't fight a ghost, because, if I was to take that to trial, all of those same people would line up and be like, yep, that's what I said. Yeah, I did. Yeah, I said that. And then, but there's no physical evidence to back it up. There's no credibility. Like, they don't care who these people are.
Right.
And there was some people that made statements that then, apparently they tried to blackmail my family, and I guess had reached out to my attorney and was like, yeah, we'll recant our statement. We really don't know who she is. But they had put a lot of weight on me, and they were willing to recant their statements. Well, it's too late. The feds don't care about that.
Right.
And there was a girl that was living in a hotel that was close by that I literally had been to that place one time. That's it. And they were like, they believed that I was her. They're like, yeah, you've been living in that motel for all this time. I'm like, I live in a house. I live in a house in the country. Like, I don't go to hotels. I was like, wait a second. Can't you guys check the records? Like, it was an insurance situation. Like, check the records. You'll know who rented that room for a whole year. Mm-hmm. But they didn't really care to do that. They were more interested in just getting me, it seemed like. So,
which was a big shock to you because you thought with you looking through this discovery they had on you and all these statements that you could just go back to them with your attorney and say, oh, by the way, that actually isn't me. That's somebody else. And here's the proof that it's not me. But what you found is that's like, you know, an ant talking to an elephant. Yeah.
It is. It's irrelevant at that point. I mean, like the people that were trying to extort money and stuff, they did end up taking that off. And it didn't come down until sentencing where they were like, hey, we did make some mistakes.
Yeah.
But all of that time. So yeah, like going through statements and going through all this stuff. And they were just convinced that I was this girl in this hotel. And I'm like, I've never been to that hotel. Like I was at that hotel one night for just 5 minutes and that's it. Mm-hmm. And then I left. I was like, that is not me. This is simple. Like all you have to do is check the records, check the cameras. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, there's cameras everywhere anymore. I mean,
right.
With your dad being an attorney, obviously he wasn't a criminal defense attorney. Did that help you being able to talk to him and work through different things with your attorney, or how did that whole thing work for you? And what was going on in your mind with all this? Like, what were you thinking?
Well, so when I got arrested, I remember coming up over the hill and seeing my whole entire driveway full of very official vehicles. There was like rangers out in my pasture and like they swarmed me with like giant guns. And I'm like, whoa. I'm like, can I go pee before we do this? And they're like, no. And so that was that. They took me to Clay County first, just for a small amount of time, and then we went on to the federal courthouse. And my dad, let's see, it seems like I was able to make one phone call to my dad just very quickly. Mm-hmm. And I was like, hey, they're picking me up right now. And so they took me to, when I got to the federal courthouse, you know, you go into those little holding rooms,
right?
And you're basically kept on ice, you know. Mm-hmm. And then they brought me out to the courtroom, which wasn't that something. I mean, what an intimidating moment. Yeah. To be handcuffed, shackled, you know, I'd never been in prison or anything before. So being handcuffed and shackled and coming in and sitting at that table and then having that plop down in front of me, I was like, oh, you know, United States versus Sabrena Morgan, that's
maybe the most intimidating thing you'll ever see in your life is the United States of America versus your name.
Yeah, absolutely. My attorney's great. He's actually one of my friends, a good friend of mine now. And I really, you know, he fought really hard for me. You know, things are starting to change and it seems like, you know, people are getting less time and they're able to negotiate some more stuff just in the people that I've talked to. But, you know, when I was going through all this, there was not much room for negotiation. Yeah. There wasn't much room you could have the greatest attorney ever and you're not going to take it to trial. You'd be an idiot to take it to trial, especially something with ghost dope. Because like I said, you cannot fight a ghost.
Right.
You can't do it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So when you get down to this, Sabrena, first of all, were you able to bond out or was that it? Was that they kept you locked up from the time they got you till the time that you ended up doing your plea bargain?
So I stayed, whatever, when I got picked up, I traveled to Osceola to like a little federal holding down there. And I was there, I think 2 nights. And then they let me out. They let me bond out. And my dad was to get me.
Okay.
I went back to court and I was able to leave with my dad. And that was really something. And my dad.
One of the things that we talked about I think it was last week when we were talking on the phone, is that you had the same amount of time on pretrial that I did. It was that 3 years. And
Yes.
that is a weird world to live in, to be indicted and being on pretrial and having that amount of time to have these thoughts in your mind of all the things that go on from morning till night.
Right. Oh no, it's crazy. I mean, pretrial is more of a prison than prison.
Yeah.
By far.
Yeah.
It was the hardest. It was by far the hardest of my whole journey was pretrial.
How did you handle it? What did you do during your 3 years of pretrial?
You know, it was a very interesting situation. I had a really great pretrial officer who came out and saw me. He was, I don't know, we clicked. Like I trusted him, and he was a good guy. And he was like, listen, he's like, why don't we get you into rehab? You know, we'll pay for it. I would like to get you in this program. And I'm like, okay. You know, he went through the whole Codaphone thing. You're going to be doing all these UAs, but he's like, I'd like to get you into this rehab program. And I'm like, okay, I'll do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had done rehab once before, and I was like, okay, well, here we go. But this one was not like that one, in that you weren't allowed to talk about your war stories, and you didn't just sit there and talk about drugs the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
It was different, and it was an outpatient rehab, and I actually went there for about 9 months. At first I was going every day, and then I got, went down to 4 days a week, then 3 days, then 2. But, I was there for 9 months, and, I met a lot of great people. A couple of them I still talk to, actually. But I mean, I got into it this time. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if it was because I felt like I was fighting for my life in so many ways, but I was fighting for my life. Like, this was it. This had to be the end, because like this life wasn't working anymore, obviously. And that whole thing, I hate the embarrassment that I caused my family, but I needed all of that to happen so bad. You know what I mean? Like, I needed that drama to pull me. It was the only thing that was going to bring me out of my life that I was in.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was the only thing that was ever going to get me out of the darkness that I was in. So, but yes, pretrial is absolutely the most horrendous thing. And they superseded my case twice. And that's what took so long to do it. But I remember, you're out and people are like, oh, you're doing so good. You went to rehab. There's no way they're going to give you prison time.
Right.
And I had one friend. He was my life coach, basically. He had been through the federal system, and we worked out and stuff together. And he was like, I would come to him. Like, I think I started working out with him about midway through my pretrial. So I worked out with him for about a year and a half before I went in. And I was like, what do you think? Like, these people are saying I won't get any time. And he's like, I want you to listen to me. You're going to get some time.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get time.
Yeah.
You are going to prison, and I want you to wrap your head around that. You're going to prison. You're going to go away for a while, and then you're going to come back. And he's like, your parents are going to be older. Your daughter's going to be older. You're going to miss a whole bunch of things,
mm-hmm.
but you're going to be fine, and you're going to get out, and you're going to go on with your life, and you're still going to have plenty of life to live. And I was like, you don't think for a second he had to tell me that one time. He had to tell me that about 45 million times,
mm-hmm.
almost like every single day. Like, I mean, I would break down. I'm a fairly strong person. I broke down. I cried more on pretrial than I've ever cried my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
The emotional, and then looking at my daughter and knowing that I was going to be leaving her behind.
I had to be like, and then what, Sabrena, what were you thinking? Like how was she going to be taken care of? Was it going to be your parents? Was it the sharing of that with your ex-husband? Like what happened with your daughter?
So my ex-husband, up until the time I was sentenced,
mm-hmm.
he, I still had my visits, my time with her.
Mm-hmm.
And then even when I was on, in federal holding, she was able to come see me once a week, and we talked on the phone every single day. And once I was sentenced, he took off to Florida with her and cut ties with my whole family, which she's very close to, and wouldn't let anybody talk to her.
It had to be tough.
She would hide. It was horrible. But she would hide. When I was in prison, she would find a way to get a hold of my dad. And, you know, we got to do some video visits and stuff like that. But that was horrible. It was horrible.
Well, let's talk about when you got sentenced too, because that you didn't get a light sentence. I mean, were you thinking, you know, when you was getting down to sentencing your plea? Because I know some of the things I read was that there was even a longer sentence than the 9 years. When you got that 9 years, how did you swallow that?
You know, I don't know. I that day is just a bunch of flashes. You know how you compartmentalize and you just kind of, I felt deer in headlights. What I remember of that day, I remember walking in, the whole courtroom was full of my family, my friends, all my loved ones were there. I mean, it was packed. And I had to read my statement and go through all that stuff. And, you know, a lot of stuff came out that there was mistakes made, some things happened, because I was looking at a lot more time. And the judge took it easy on me. I mean, he could have very easily just given me 15 years, but my PSI, you know, the original one read life on the first go of it. And some of that stuff did get taken off. It was crazy to me. It was such a hard time. But
did they take you that day, Sabrena, or did you get an opportunity to have those 2 or 3 months of more weird time before you went in?
No. So when I took my plea in Missouri, if you have a federal, you know, indictment, when you take your plea, that's when you turn yourself into the marshals. So I was on pretrial for 3 years. I took my plea. I turned myself into the marshals that day. And I was in federal holding for 1 year before my sentencing. Wow. Yeah.
Wow. So
it was
that sounds like a lot. So tell me about that.
Well, you know, federal holding, you're in there with everybody.
Every custody level, right?
Every custody level, and everybody's treated like they're, you know, you're in max security. I got really comfortable there.
Really? You got like in a good routine, you mean?
I got a great routine. I remember I was doing something and the warden came through and I was like, hey, we have a DVD player. Is there any way we can get some like workout videos? And she was like, yeah, I'll bring some down. And I was like, that's the art of pacification. I'm like, you know, that's a lie. No, we had insanity videos like 2 days later. So I was like, cool. So I had a good routine there. I was very dark before prison. I got saved in federal holding. I had, you know, that was my first time with real incarceration. You know, I had when I first got there, you're in intake for a couple of days. And the only thing that we had to read was the Bible. And I was like, it was like an old King James. It was, you know, I was like, and so I started reading from the beginning. And the lady that was in there with me, I was like, why do you read this? She's like, oh, it brings me comfort. I'm like, this brings you comfort? You know what I mean? Like,
it's hard to read. It's the King James version, yeah.
So anyway, I'm like, okay, you know, whatever. And so it was like before the last episode or the last season of Game of Thrones, and I started reading it and I was like, well, this kind of resembles a Game of Thrones. So, you know, whatever, we'll just keep going. But I made friends with a girl that was in there for like similar charges, and she was funny. She would try to talk to me about different stuff, and I just wasn't having it. And then she's like, okay, I'm going to tell you a Bible bedtime story. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. So she starts telling the story of like Esther, but she's doing it in a gangster version. And it was the funniest thing I've ever seen. And I laughed so hard. Like I couldn't even try to do it justice to do this.
Yeah.
So I don't.
Yeah.
I'll never forget it. And I was like, okay, where's that at? And she's like, this is where you're going to read. So anyway, it went on like that. So I ended up getting saved, and I became really close to the chaplain, who was an amazing man. Like, he was just very kind, very non-judgmental. And, you know, I was like, I gone through a lot of stuff, and I want to work through this. Like, I think this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so, I worked through some books that it was a lot. It was a lot, but, it did change me quite a bit. It did, not the King James version, but it you know, it having my faith, it did bring me a lot of peace.
Yeah.
And so that's what I've held on to that. And prison was a blessing for me.
Well, let's talk about, because I mean, you spent a whole year in there, and then you get transferred to Pekin in Illinois. For all those down in the Cayman Islands listening, that's just not too far from Kansas City and St. Louis. But you went to Pekin, Illinois. How big a camp was that?
It was less than 300 people.
Okay, that's about where I was. We had 400 people. So was after spending a year in this strange kind of detention lockup, did it feel different for you to get to a camp?
Well, yeah, it was wonderful.
Yeah,
it was the most glorious thing ever. But I do have to back up just a second, though, because I had to do two trips on Conair too.
Oh boy!
So when I left federal holding,
so you ended up in Oklahoma. Is that where you?
I did.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. You did it all.
And it was funny because I did the full tour.
Yep.
So yeah, you fly all day long because you go pick up people all over the place, and then they fly to the ramp or whatever, and then you shuffle your way up to these weird little steps that you have to stand on for them to unshackle you.
Mm-hmm.
But after all that, that's when you find out where you're designated, because up until that time, nobody's told you where you're designated. And I remember the guy was like, "Yeah, you're going to Pekin Satellite Camp," and I was like, I don't think you're right. Like, I don't think I'm going to, because I guess in my head, I was such a criminal because of my points but I had no criminal history. So it did make sense. But for some reason, I wrapped my brain. Like, what do you mean? So I just kept messing with the officers, and I'm like, hey, can you look that up and make sure that's still there? And he's like, the last guy was like, listen to me. You're going here. Like, what is wrong with you? I was like, I don't know, dude. I don't know. So we did I think I was in Oklahoma City for like 5 days, and then we flew out of there and ended up in Pekin. And the flight, so we landed in Rockford, and Pekin's about 3 hours away. And it's so weird. That Conair is something else, because they circle the plane with all the giant guns. I mean, the airplane itself is a little spooky because it's not that great of an airplane.
Well, I'll tell you something funny, Sabrena, is like, I mean, strange or odd, funny. So I voluntarily surrendered. And so that's kind of weird too, because you just stand at the gate, you stand at this, Leavenworth's 1879 built. It looks like Shawshank Redemption. You just stand there. It was like really cold day, but it was like nobody's there but me. And I'm just standing at this gate. So I'm in prison for a year and a half, and I have to go back to our civil trial. So that means I have to travel from Leavenworth to St. Louis. And the guys were like, "Oh no, it'll be good. The marshals are cool, and you'll even Taco Bell or McDonald's on the way." So I think, okay. Well, I go up, and they call me. They never tell you what's going to happen. It just happens. So they don't want you to know anything. So I get locked up in the big place for about 4 or 5 hours, and I'm thinking, obviously, there's been some kind of mistake or something. What's going on? They finally come get me, and they shackle me. And it's this Warren County sheriff with another sheriff, and we thrown into van. And it's the first time I've been handcuffed the whole time. I mean, I got shackled like, I had just murdered somebody. But when I came back, remember, I voluntarily surrendered at this gate. I said, "Hey, I'm here." And, they open up the gate and take me in. When I come back in that van, I'm shackled. They pull out rifles. They surround the van with 4 rifles with guards to walk me back into the prison I voluntarily surrendered to. It was crazy. It's crazy. And I walked past that place all the time to my job, on the outside of the fence. And I come back to, after, 4, 5, 6 days, I've been up in this county jail, and you would have thought that I'd, murdered a whole family. It was crazy.
Right. So your county jail experience was probably similar to my federal holding.
Yeah, it's horrible.
The maximum.
Yeah. Not good. Yeah. I was glad to be back at Leavenworth, and that's a really weird thing to say, but I was.
Yeah.
Well, I want to dive into, because I think you kind of found yourself in prison, which some people, there's 2 ways to go in prison. One is just you kind of curl up in a fetal position you just totally give up. And then the other people are figuring it out. They adapt. Right. They find things. Sabrena, what happened to you? Like when you got there? Cause I know you started writing, what happened to you?
So I've been working out like a psychopath in federal holding. And so as soon as I got there, people would be like, "Are you a personal trainer?" And I'm like,
"Yeah,
no."
You be anything you want in prison.
Yeah, you can. That's a funny thing too. Anything you want in prison, and people.
I met the richest people. I don't know how many people said they were pro athletes, and it was crazy. What everybody thought they could be in prison. Yeah. So anyway, you didn't say that you were the trainer, but you could have been.
I could have been. So they were like, "Hey, can you teach a step aerobics class?" And I'm like, "I don't think you know me. I don't have any rhythm at all. Like, what are you talking about?" And it was so funny because the step aerobic lady had left, and I had tried to do a couple classes. I couldn't hit the beat. I couldn't do anything. And I was like, and whatever. I never would have ever signed up for this if I was out in the real world. No way. Yeah. But this girl and I we got out these old DVDs, and I was like, okay, we're going to learn some moves. We put this DVD in. And this lady's like going crazy all over the thing. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. So I was like rep step. Basically, I was just like teaching aerobics class, jumping on this board and stuff. But it turned out pretty good. I really enjoyed it. And I taught a lot of fitness classes, but I worked, I was a food service warehouse inventory person.
Me too.
And so,
I was too. That's where my first job was, in the food warehouse. Yeah. I even got forklift certified, which for the friends that have known me forever find that fascinating.
I am forklift certified as well. Yeah, I did the whole thing. And it was interesting. Well, so our warehouse housed the food for the camp and for the men's next door, the prison next door.
Yeah.
And so it was a decent sized warehouse, but it was a good job. I originally, when I first got there, I started mowing. I was like, here, I'll drive, because I could drive a tractor. So they're like, you can drive the big tractor? I'm like, yes, I can. So I'm driving this 6100 with a bat wing on it, that's cruising around the pastures. I was like, this is the best life ever. I can't, this is wonderful. I don't care if it's 100 degrees. I don't care. This is perfect. I'm so happy.
Yeah.
And the warehouse boss, I kept being like, hey, I know you guys got food in there. I'm hungry. What's up? Anyway, so his lead person was going to be getting out of prison. And so he sent for me and was like, what's up? Do you want to do the inventory? And I'm like, yeah, I can do that. So that's what I did the rest of my time. I did, that was my job the entire time. And I really liked it. I ate well. I got to eat like fresh stuff more than anything, So that was good. But I would work all day during that, during the week. And then I would work out in the gym at night. And there was just such a different energy there. Like, it's just raw. You know what I mean? Like, everybody's wearing the same thing. Everybody's at ground zero. Yeah. Like, nobody's better than anybody else. And that was incredibly comforting for some reason. Like, you just didn't have to care. Like, you're not going to have everybody's got the same clothes. Mm-hmm. You get different shoes, boy. I'll tell you what, they're going to be like, what are those? But there's there's something healing about it. At least there was for me. I read a lot of self-help books. I read a lot of books on habits, and I kind of fell in love with that because I'm kind of an obsessive person. So, I'm reading these books about habits, and I'm hyper focused on my habits. And so I'm like, okay, this is my time. It's my time to train myself up for the rest of my life. I can create these habits right now. And that's what I can take out with me.
Well, Sabrena, the big deal about that, because I think you just dropped a big nugget of wisdom there, is that you can have motivation, but your motivation wears out. So you have to have discipline and habits that keep you going through that, because that becomes what you do as a routine. Because people think, well, I just need to get motivated. Well, that actually is not the case. You have to have the habits that keep the discipline, that keep you going into the steps you want to go to. That's a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a big deal. It was something that, I just, I'm an obsessive person. If I'm going to do something, I'm going all in, go big or go home. I mean, Lord help me. But yes, so I really started paying attention to like everything that I did. And, like from the morning when I start I get up and brush my teeth, and I would start setting my intentions for the day. And I was hyper focused on like throughout the day, like, is what I'm about to do, like, is this going to help me with the trajectory of my life? Like, is this where I want to go? Because like people would be like, oh no, don't worry about working out. Let's go watch this TV show. And I'm like, that's not what I'm trying to do.
Right. You weren't wanting to waste your time. Yeah.
I didn't want to waste a second of it because I was very much into.
You were preparing to better yourself to get to whenever you got home. You talked about your brother, and your brother really telling you to blog, and you were like, "What? What's a blog?" And then you like started writing, and you started writing from prison, and these great blogs that went out into the world.
Yeah. So he came to me and was like, "You have a really interesting story, and I think you should blog about it." And I was like, he'd come to visit me, and he was like, "I really think you need to do this." And I'm like, "What's a blog?" And he was like, "I'll send you some examples." Well, so he sent me some examples. So what I would do is I would pick a topic, and I would write about it all week long. Sometimes when I'm at work, sometimes like after my workouts, but I would always make sure to write like 250 words minimum. Just that's it. And you're a writer, so like normally 250 words turns into like a page or two or three or four.
Yeah.
Just depending on food, whatever you're doing. And so I would write that all week long. And then Friday night, when everybody else was watching the Friday night movies, I was landing my plane. And I put my story together, putting my blog together, and getting it ready to go. And so then Saturday morning, I would get up, and the computers would come on at 6 a.m. and I would start typing, and I would type for 30 minutes. And then of course you're kicked off the computer for 30 minutes. And so I would do that throughout the day in between workouts and everything else. And so,
and we were saying, Sabrena, that you've got to learn to type fast in prison, because they charge you 5 cents a minute while you're typing. So you got to really get that down.
You get you become fast. The fast. I mean, I can whip stuff out so fast, boy. Yeah. I mean, it's funny.
But the other thing about that though, Sabrena, it had to be for you going through all the stuff that you've gone through, and a lot of the things you said, you were living a double life. And so you were kind of keeping a lot of things in. The things you write about now and in these blogs, you're letting it all out. That had to be a huge release from you, almost like a freeing of the mind. You're in prison, but you were freeing your mind out of your own prison of the mind.
Yeah. The thing about federal indictments, as you know, is like, you can't hide that necessarily. I mean, I guess you really could if you really worked at it, but I mean, for the most part, like, my whole community knew about it.
Sure.
And there was no hiding. Like, once I was indicted and once I was sentenced, there was no hiding that. Like, all these articles and all these terrible things that were, if you Google my name and it comes up and there it is, that's all. You can't hide from that. And I decided when I was in prison that I wasn't gonna hide from that anymore. Like, that was there was no more double lives. There was complete 100% transparency from now on. Like, that's how it's going to be. Like, yes, I did these things, and now I'm going to do better because of it. And I'm going to help other people because that's what you have to do. Like, that's not me anymore. And I truly believe, like, my transition through prison and out, like, I'm such a different person now than I was before. Just night and day different.
What did you do, Sabrena, with, like, because you were in for, 4 years? Like, what did you do with hard days in prison? How did you get through hard days in prison?
I did a whole bunch of burpees. I did a lot of burpees. Yeah. I mean, there was, towards the end when I was in quarantine waiting to come out for the CARES Act, I was, in this little room losing my mind. And I had a friend that so in quarantine for the COVID situation, they put you back in the swing and they have these like meat flap locker, these plastic things that are like, what you would see in a meat locker. Mm-hmm. And that was what kept me from the other portion of the prison. And so I would have a friend that would come to that portion of it, and we would do burpee challenges through the plastic. And there was many days that we did 1,000 burpees.
Let's talk about that whole thing with COVID, because that is something that, I was talking to some people that I'd been with at Leavenworth, and we were talking about how weird it had to have been to go be in prison during COVID, because people got a little bit of taste of what it's like to lose your freedom on the outside. Because when COVID hit, everybody, they had to stay in their house, you contain all those things that happened during the COVID mandates. Still nothing like prison, but a little taste of it. I can't imagine what it was like actually in prison, because there's those little pieces of things. I'm going for a walk, or I'm going to do this. And those feel like little freedoms to yourself. But if they take those away, or your visits away from your family or whatever, how did you work through all that? Or how did it feel? Like how did the world change in there? It
was insane. And I'll never forget, when they made the announcement for everybody to go to their cubes, I was on a video visit with my brother and his wife, and it was like 7:30, and I was sitting by a window and I kept looking out, and I was like, I don't see a tornado or anything, because I was like, we'll just talk until they come. Mm-hmm. I was like, I don't see any, I don't think we're having bad weather. And like, it was a TV room where the computers were, and I was like, hey, is there something going on? And they're like, everybody's like, I don't know. And they were like, just stay on there until the cops come. We'll watch for you. So I stayed on there as long as I could. And then when they came, I went to my cube, and they were like, yeah, you guys are locked down until further notice. But I was on, working in the food warehouse. You're kind of an important employee, because those officers don't know where anything is. Right. And so, I was able to get out for a lot of COVID lockdown. I was able to work through that. And so I had my day. But, a lot of it, I kind of flashed back to federal holding. And I honestly think that doing that 1 year in federal holding kind of set the tone for the rest of it, because there was nothing I couldn't handle. Right. You adapt. There was a lot of people that self-surrendered that they were not handling it well. They were not doing well. But I just basically went back to federal holding days, but with writing this time. So instead of being locked down, I was able to write, and they would let me work out in the hallways. And I had a couple friends on my alley that would work out with me. Even when we got sick, and like we had one person get sick, and we were like, hey, you guys need to get her out of here. Like, she's sick. Like, she's not well. And they left her there for another 48 hours. So we all got it. But even when we were on the sick alley, I was still working out and doing HIIT. I was doing HIIT classes in the middle of the sick alley, and the officers were like, what are you doing? I was like, dude, I'm working out for this whole thing. Like, I don't care. Like, this is how I survived. Yeah. So I made notes of every single thing that happened during COVID. I'd watch officers out the windows and make notes on everything. Like, I got creepy.
Well, I want to talk about you, because you weren't in for a short amount of time. You weren't like a year and a day person. And, I felt like, and I want to know how you felt when you got close to the door. It's almost like you think about being on the outside, but you don't think about it a lot because you have this real primitive world that you're in. And then when you start getting close to the door, you start thinking, whoa, I'm coming back out. Like what went through your mind? Like knowing that I'm heading out now, I'm going to start a different world and I'm leaving this world.
Well, like the common theme of my whole prison sentence. So let me back up for just a moment.
Okay.
So when I had to turn myself in when I took my plea, originally they had told me, oh no, we're gonna continue this out for 6 months and you won't be taking your plea for a while. And so I was like, okay, cool. And then like, I think it was just a couple days later that they're like, no, you have to take your plea, in 3 weeks. And then I think it was about 2 hours later, they're like, no, it's next week. And I'm like, what? So I had that Band-Aid ripped off.
Yeah.
And so, and that was a good thing. Looking back, like that was a blessing because if I knew that was coming, I think that would have been even harder. So I basically had a Band-Aid ripped off and I just had to go for it. Same thing with getting out. And it was weird because, I was up for the CARES Act, but I didn't qualify for the First Step Act. So I really didn't think that I was going to get out on the CARES Act either. I didn't know why they would approve me for that, but not the First Step Act. Mm-hmm. So I really didn't get my hopes up. And then they called me up to, put my paperwork in. And I was like, okay, whatever. They're gonna get to Grand Prairie or somewhere and be like, she's got some pretty ugly charges. Nothing violent, but pretty ugly. I mean, it was ugly enough for the First Step Act not to want me. So I would assume
and
that.
For everybody listening, Grand Prairie is the place for whatever reason where it all goes to and it comes back on what happens to you. It's Grand Prairie, Texas, I think.
Yes, it is. It is Texas. Yeah. So that was in February when they originally called me in to do paperwork, and my 50% mark I think was in April. So I was like, okay, you guys are really on top of things, whatever, we'll see what happens. So April rolls around and I'm like, are they going to do anything? Like, what's up? What's happening? Nothing. And it was like, I think it was May 3rd, maybe May 5th. My counselor comes down to the warehouse and he was like, he shows up and walks in and I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, pack your shit. You're going to quarantine.
Wow.
And I'm like, what?
Wow.
Are you serious? And at that time they were doing 30-day quarantine. So I was like, well, when's my out date? And he's like, I don't know yet. You'll find out when you get up there. And I was like, okay. So I packed my stuff. And I mean, I gave some stuff away, but not much because honestly, I didn't believe it.
Right.
I still didn't believe it. And there was a part of me that was like,
you don't believe it until you walk out the door anyway. I don't think.
You're right. And I had that mentality. I'll tell you why, because it did happen at one point. But so I pack my stuff. I go into quarantine and it's just me and like maybe 2 other girls. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Well, I just turned the TV room into a workout room, just like I would normally do. And I would sit in there and write, and then I would work out, and I would write, and I'd work out, and I made these hip bracelets with these little knots. So like my fingers were worn out. I was making hip bracelets for everybody on the whole compound. And so that was like, I think it was like the 5th. And so the next week they were like, okay, your out date's on the 26th. And I'm like, that's not 30 days. Like, is that going to be all right? And so coming up to the time, everything seemed to be going, everything was happening. My PO hadn't been to my house, which a lot of other girls were like, oh, the PO's already been out. Nothing on that end was happening. And I was like, there's something wrong. And so they shut my phone. My parents drove from Kansas City to Pekin to pick me up. It was, they shut my phones off and everything the night before, just like, they would. So I was like, okay. So I had passed out my stuff at about 7:15 that morning. Mm-hmm. Here's my stuff. I guess it's happening. At 7:30, here comes the administration. He's like, Morgan, you got to come with me. And I was like, outside of quarantine? He's like, yeah. And I was like, oh my God. I mean, the flood of emotion was, I don't have words for it. It was terrible. And so I'm following him up to administration. I looked at him. I was like, I'm not going home, am I? He's like, we're going to work through this. And I'm like, I took those little words and I just held on to them for dear life because I really wanted to throw up all over my boots. But So I go in and my case manager is there and she's like, okay, listen, she's like, somebody from your case has a separate key and they're in Leavenworth. And so you're not going to be able to go there. We have to find you another halfway house. Topeka said that they would take you. And I was like, Topeka, like, that's really far from my house. And he looks at me, he's like, you want out, right? And I'm like, yep, Topeka's fine. Topeka will be just fine. That's fine. And so anyway, and I thought, my God, you know, they didn't get this stuff figured out, but they don't. And I want to get to some of that in a little bit too. But so they didn't. She was like, just go back to quarantine. You know, they let me call my parents. And my dad was so sweet. He was like, well, I guess this is a practice run. So we know where we're going the next time. And I'm like, bless you. Yeah. Bless you. You're so sweet. So it was the next Tuesday I got to leave. It was June 1st June 1st is when I got to walk out the door. Yeah. And it was fun. It's like my boss from the warehouse, like she made an announcement. My counselor came and got me and like personally walked me out the door. And I was a wreck. Yeah. And I'm passing stuff out. I had a bunch of deodorants and stuff. Apparently I thought we were going to, you know, run out of deodorant in the world. I'm passing stuff out as I'm going, but I'm still not believing it. Yeah. And it was so weird because like during COVID, you know, you're watching TV and people have their masks on and it's such a different world. And then when I walked out the prison, because during prison, you have to wear your mask all the time. Mm-hmm. I walked out the door and I was like, don't I need my mask? And they're like, no. I'm like, what? So like everything I saw on TV was so different from what the world really was. Yeah. It was so weird to me. You know what I mean? Like I feel like I've been lied to.
So what happened when you left? Like, is your parents there? And then like how do you, because then you had the halfway house that was quite a ways from where you were. What all happened?
So when you leave prison and you're going to do home confinement, you have so much time allotted to where you leave and you've got to make it to that halfway house for that first check-in.
And they tell you if you don't get there on time that they could send you back and it could be a violation.
I know
it's kind of scary.
Not a situation, and it's a little intimidating. So, my dad was like, "Do you want to stop for food?" I'm like, "Absolutely not. Nope. Just go. Let's go." So we got to the halfway house, and I did my check-in. But the first thing that I did when I got in the car was try to get a hold of my ex-husband, and he blocked my dad's number. And I found my daughter on like Instagram or something. I tried to send her messages. I sent messages to a couple of her friends and I was not getting anywhere. And so anyway, that was all I wanted was her. Sure. You know what I mean? Like that's literally all I wanted was just, I wanted to talk to her. I wanted to see her. You know, I still had 50-50 custody at this point. Yeah. I still had my custody. So I'm like, all right, what's that? Because when I called him, I'm like, I still have custody. I would like to make arrangements to see her. And he just blocked the number. So anyway, we get to the halfway house, do my check-in, and then I get home and it's so quiet. And I stayed with my parents the first year that I was out because it was just easier, you know, on home confinement, you can't just leave to go to the store. You can't just do, you know, a lot of things. So being there for that first year was really helpful. But, so during the COVID era for home confinement, we only had to check in, I think it was once a month at first. And then as they loosened restrictions a little bit, it went to like 2 times a month. And then it was every week. So, you know, it's the whole way through, I'm like, why isn't there a Kansas City halfway house? Like, why? Where's that at? Like, why don't we have that? And, because I remember one of my friends coming to me when the Kansas City halfway house closed down, and she was like, "Where are we going to go?" And it never registered to me what happened on the other side of prison. You know what I'm saying? Like, I never really fully grasped or made a plan of what was going to happen on the other side. And I remember standing there looking like dumbass, thinking, "Well, I don't know how that affects me. Like, what do you mean?" Yeah, you know. And so, and I remember thinking, well, by the time I get out, surely there'll be one. Mm-hmm. And she's like, because of funding. And I was like, okay, whatever, you know, okay. I mean, it's going to be years until I have to deal with it, but it, you know, it wasn't that many years later. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
So Finally catching up with your daughter. What was that like?
It was crazy because I actually sent a well check down there. Couldn't get a hold of him, couldn't get a hold of anybody. So I sent a well check to see if she was okay. And that was when she found out that I was out.
Mm.
And then my ex-husband had kicked her out of the house. He'd kicked her out a couple times. And then the last one, he kicked her out, like made her pack her bag. So I was like, I'll buy you a ticket.
Yeah.
So I bought her a ticket and she got here. And then he showed up and acted like I'd kidnapped her and took it to the court. And because I, had been in prison, they immediately sided with him and it was a mess.
I bet.
It was terrible. Seeing her for the first time was the most amazing thing ever. We sat there and really, bonded again. And then I had to send her back with him.
God,
and then now I was under restriction and I had to do supervised visits, like supervised video visits. I'm like, come on. Yeah.
So where is it now? Where is it now? Like, what's going on now with you and your daughter?
So she turned 18 and 2 days before she turned 18, he kicked her out and she was like, Mom, I'm going to stay at a friend's house because if we have a plane ticket, I'm there. He's going to say you kidnapped me again. And I was like, you're right. So she stayed there. And then she flew back on her 18th birthday, the first flight out.
Okay.
And so now she's here, she lives with me. She goes to college. She's got a job and we do house projects and it's amazing. And I remember back to the day before I took my plea, I was at my attorney's office and his paralegal was there. And I was looking through this window and I was like, how am I going to do this? Like, how do I do this? And she said, my daughter was 12. She said, you see that sweet little thing right there? She said, that sweet little thing is about to hit puberty and she's going to be a different person. She's like, you're going to miss all the bad stuff and then you're going to come back and you guys will be best friends and you're going to be a hero. And she called it. Boy, she called it.
How great is that?
Believe. Yeah, because that is my best friend.
What are you doing now, Sabrena? Like, because reading and doing, and I hope that all takes you somewhere really cool because, and I know that you've got such an ability to connect. Like, what's in your head of what you want to accomplish now?
So I have a fellowship with dream.org and in this fellowship there are 15 other people and we have several mentors. Dream is the one that pushed through the First Step Act.
Yep.
So they're kind of a big deal and I'm pretty honored. I'm so honored for this whole situation and these people. They're just unbelievable. But during my interview process, I was on a soapbox about the federal halfway house in Kansas City. There's not, and I feel like, there's a responsibility. Like, you send these people to prison, you better have a plan to bring them back. And what's happening right now simply isn't working because on home confinement, you have to, like, for instance, I drive 88 miles one way just to do my check-ins every single week. Just a quick, simple check-in.
It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. There has to be another way. And it's amazing to me because, like, I was at a gala last Friday and I just plopped down with some trial lawyers and we got to chit-chatting about the federal system. And I was like, yeah, I'm really, I have a project right now that I want to try to get a federal halfway house in Kansas City. And she looked at me really weird and she's like, there's not a federal halfway house? I was like, no.
Right.
So there's halfway houses. There's no federal halfway houses. So the closest one is in Leavenworth. So what that means is, like, for people east of here, for people, beyond Kansas City, some of those people were denied to come out of prison because there wasn't a halfway
place
house
to go. Right. Yep.
And that's not unusual. In 2017, the Trump administration started cutting funding for the Second Chance Act, which is what funds a halfway house. There was at least 16 halfway houses that closed down. And then, the First Step Act passed, and then the CARES Act. And now, you have all these people that are heavily relying on halfway houses, and there's not enough.
So dream.org, I know what it is, but what does it do?
Well, they do several different things. They do a lot of things. They're amazing. But they have, like, a tech portion of it, they have a justice portion of it, and then they have a green portion of it. Mm-hmm. So, they have different causes. their tech community tries to get people, put into jobs, tech type jobs. And then green, obviously, they have a lot of campaigns going on right now on the justice portion of it. They're trying to push through the Equal Act, which is, the crack cocaine and cocaine only have baking soda as a difference. That's it. And so, but people are still being sentenced heavily for, they could have 1 gram of crack, and 1 gram of crack and 1 gram of cocaine is very different. Like if they had 18 grams of cocaine, they would get the same sentence. So, it's unfortunate the way, that should have been gone a long time ago, and it should have been brought to the floor. But, getting bills passed
it's hard.
through.
It's hard.
It's hard. And there's so much that goes into it. And I think the more I look into this, the more I find out that the Second Chance Act, the funding for it was cut. And I'm like, this is so much bigger than just a federal halfway house in Kansas City.
Well, I mean, I think what it is too is that I never want anybody to get confused on the First Step Act was the first step. And there's so many things that have to be create momentum. And there's a lot of people that are doing good things all around. That's one of the things I love about what I do is I get to talk to a lot of people in different states that are doing really incredible work. And it's so important that the people who have been directly affected, are at the seat at the table, because those are the people that really know what's important. Because there's a lot of people out there that have good feelings about that they want to help, but it really needs to be people who've been affected that need the seat at the table so that they can stay on point. So that there's like what you're talking about with the halfway house and how you saw that affected people to how they couldn't get out. All those things are really important. And I hope as it goes along, Sabrena, that the work that you do and the work that other people do, that we continue to connect the dots so that we become a stronger voice so that more change can happen. And that's, that happens a little bit at a time, but I think the more people are out there that have a brain, they didn't take our brain, that we put that in motion. And I think one of the things that reminds me, I thought the thing that you said here, and it was in one of the blogs that you wrote, but I just thought it was such a cool thing. It says the cool thing about life is that you get to keep trying until it's over, as long as you don't give up. I just think that's just like your life is that, your life story is that, and you put that so succinctly into that statement. As long as you don't give up, is if you just keep trying. The cool thing about life is until it's over, you can always try. And you're all about, don't worry about the failures. Don't worry about the mistakes. Keep going, because those are the things you learn from. But Sabrena, I want to ask you, because you've had so many different layers of your life that you've lived through. And now I can feel it. It's like the feel good stuff. It's just feel good stuff with what you're doing with dream.org, feel good stuff with your daughter. You've got yourself, out on a farm and doing things that you love. What do you think's your biggest takeaway through all of that you've been through?
I just feel, about prison, what I take away from prison is that that's not the end. Like, it's never the end. Like, no matter what you're going through, it's not the end. Kind of like what you said before. But my biggest takeaway is it's not the end. It's not over. Your life's not over just because you have a prison sentence. Like, life goes on, and there's a good life on the other side of here. And there's so many people that do care. And there's a lot more people that will care when they realize that there's needs that are necessary, but it takes a voice to be able to bring that to their attention. And I just feel like, like life after prison is really amazing, because you can become whoever you want to become. You know what I mean? Like, you can be like, you don't have to be, down and depressed and, like, oh yeah, I was really bad and I went to prison. I made some big mistakes, and this is my comeback story. Like, this is me coming back, and it's exciting. Like, it can be an exciting thing. Like, yes, just like any part of life, you're gonna go through some stuff, but there's too much positivity and joy that you can get on the other side of your prison sentence. It's not over. And I back to TikTok, I feel like that has been such a giant platform for prison advocacy, because, there's so many people watching right now, and knowing that there's a need, reentry is such a big thing. It's such a big deal, and not just halfway houses, but really reentry. Like, I believe reentry needs to start from the beginning.
Yeah.
It needs to start from the day that you are arrested, and there needs to be like a concierge.
Yeah.
I sit on a board for that's prep for reentry, prep for release. I apologize, but and that's, we're brand new. We're just kind of getting going, but that's kind of our motto, is that, you know, you start from it needs to start from the very beginning. And it's not just a person that's incarcerated, it's the family.
It's for the family,
you know?
because family goes to prison, right?
Your whole family goes to prison. And not only that, but it can be a community thing too.
Yeah.
And all these people that are sharing their stories on TikTok was incredibly comforting to me.
Yeah.
And me being tell my story, it's been really healing. And, you know, there's days where I'm like, okay, I mean, shut up. People don't want to hear you. But I've had so many people reach out, because I'm one of those people. I would give out my number. I'm like, just call me. They're like, I'm freaking out. I'm getting ready to go to prison. I'm like, just call me. I'll just talk you through it. You're fine.
And I want to, and by the way, Sabrena, I want to give a shout out to Gina Pendergraph, because she connected me to you, and I love that. That's what I love about. And let's talk about too, how to get a hold of you, follow you on TikTok, which is just Sabrena Morgan. Yeah. Go to your website, that's sabrenamorgan.com. And then where I went to, I don't know how I got to Medium. How do I get over there? Because I ended up there, and I'm not even sure how I ended there.
It's medium.com. And I'm just Sabrena Morgan on medium.com. Like, you can get on medium.com and search that up. But you can also, I mean, I would be happy to give my email address as well.
Please. Yeah,
absolutely. It's Sabrena, and it's Sabrena. I know that's spelled funny. .Morgan. .Missouri, all spelled out, at gmail.com. And you're welcome to reach out to me. Like, if somebody's going, because, you know, I had that person that coached me through my, and I want to bless somebody else with that too, because just having someone to talk you through it, it's priceless. It's huge. So, yeah.
That's a good word to end it right there, Sabrena, because that's why you're good at what you're doing. You're sharing your story and helping people. For everybody who's out there, I know that you got a lot from this show from Sabrena. So go and follow the show. Hit the bell on Spotify. Hit the follow the show on Apple. I know it's a pain, but it's great to leave a review if you got something from today. I don't know what happens with the algorithm, but it really just puts it on steroids when people leave the reviews. If you want to know any more about what I've got going on, it's BrentCassidy.com with a TY, not a DY. And I love all the feedback from you guys every week. Love staying in touch. As I used to say when I was writing my emails back and forth from prison, stay strong. I'll do the same. Sabrena Morgan, thank you so much today for sharing your story.
Thank you.
It's awesome.
Thank you.
Nightmare Success, in and out. Thanks.